John Eisen, who will introduce our moderator and give an overview of what this is all about today.
Our moderator tonight is someone who doesn't need an introduction. She's been to more meetings than any of us for the last 11 years. She has been our neighborhood prosecutor, and she has represented us on the LAUSD school board. This program is Tamar's idea. She and I had a discussion at the toy drive this last December, and we were talking about homeless, and she said, I'd like to do a program on homeless, and we're doing it. And Tamar got the panelists that we have tonight, and I consider this basically Homeless in LA 101. We're going to be educated tonight from the experts. Tamar?
Hi, everybody. Now that I knocked everything over, it's a good way to start. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Gallatin. Thank you, John, for the introduction. I just wanted, when John and I were talking about this at the toy drive, what I was telling him is how frustrated I am, and I know LAPD is, and many of you, because for too long in Los Angeles, homelessness has been framed as a law enforcement issue, something where the police are to be called and we're supposed to prosecute, and that's somehow supposed to solve something, and it's not. And when I was talking to John about that, we were talking about affordable housing, and we were talking about mental health care and social services and all sorts of issues that have way more impact on this crisis than anyone I can put in jail for 2 days. So that's how this panel got started. We have some amazing folks who really are experts in the field. So first, I just want to let each of them introduce themselves for a few minutes. Just tell us who they are and how they got working on this issue, so you know who we have here. And then we're going to dive in and really talk nitty-gritty on some of the stuff that you're seeing every day in the newspaper and certainly out on the streets. So I will start to my right, to Molly, and she will introduce herself, and then we'll go on and meet the rest of the panelists.
Hi everybody, I'm Molly Reisman. I work on housing and homelessness policy for Supervisor Sheila Kuehl. You are one dedicated bunch, being out at 7:30 at night learning about homelessness, so I'm really grateful to all of you for being here tonight to hear us. I've been working on ending homelessness for a long time, well over a decade. I've been a provider. I worked for a supportive housing developer. I've worked on policy many years ago, working on homeless policy when Eric Garcetti was on the city council for him. I've been a funder. I was the Los Angeles director for a group called Corporation for Supportive Housing. And since Sheila took office, I've been working on homelessness and housing policy for the county. So I've worn a few different hats, and I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight.
Good evening, thank you. Good evening, thank you. I'll speak up loudly. I'm sorry, I have allergies, so my voice may go down a little bit. I'm thankful to be here this evening, to be here with all of you. Like Molly, I've been working on this for some time. It was one of my first careers as a provider of a family shelter on the East Coast, and soon walked into working on the policy side when trying to implement programs that didn't seem to work too well. In Los Angeles, I worked at United Way prior to going back to school and then coming to work for Team Garcetti on homelessness policy. So I'm glad to be here tonight.
Hello. Hello, my name is John Horn. I'm with LA Family Housing. I'm the Vice President of Programs for LA Family Housing, which is a provider of housing and services to persons experiencing homelessness in North Hollywood. And I'm also with the San Fernando-Santa Clarita Valley Homeless Coalition. And I've been working on homelessness for 25 years now. Born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, live in Granada Hills, and I'm committed to this issue because I want to see our community improved from all aspects. So this is really important for me as an issue, as a person who lives in the valley and feels that everyone should have a home.
So, thank you all. So, you all know kind of who's up here to talk about this. I want to start by just giving, talking a little bit about, and John, I'm going to start with you, so be ready once you get the microphone situation working. Figure out which one it is. It might be Molly's. Okay. John, can you tell us a little bit, since you work here in the San Fernando Valley, kind of who, I'll just talk really loudly. How does that work? This one is working now. Okay. John, can you talk to us a little bit about who the homeless are in the San Fernando Valley, and then maybe Molly and Melissa could chime in on what it looks like city and county-wide? I mean, I'm talking, folks want to know, are folks veterans? Are they families? Mental illness? Kind of who's out there?
So we are seeing all sorts of individuals who are homeless in the San Fernando Valley. One of the things that we see most is that the persons on the street have a connection to the valley. They're not transplants from other areas. They grew up in the valley, or they've spent considerable time in the valley because they have family or other connections here. So when we are doing outreach, we are finding individuals who this is their home, this is their area. A lot of people that you see on the streets in Van Nuys, for example, have long connections to the Van Nuys area, to the Sherman Oaks area. And they want to stay here, and it's our job to try to help them to find a permanent place to go. Yes, a lot of people on the streets may have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, veteran. There's a million ways a person can become homeless. And lots of different issues. It's not just one category you can place somebody into. In the last homeless count that took place in Los Angeles, our area had a little over 4,000 people who were listed as being homeless, and we're anxiously awaiting the count results from the most recent count that took place this last January. So we see a cross-section, veterans, yes, families, yes, lots of individuals.
Talk countywide, are we looking at similar things?
I'll do
I'm sorry, citywide, Molly's a county, sorry about that.
No problem. We work together, which is really great. Citywide, we have 26,000. Again, as John mentioned, this is from the 2015 count. So if anyone participated in January, we're still waiting for those results. So this is a year-old data. But at that time, we had 26,000 residents that are experiencing homelessness. 69%, or about 17,000, are what we call unsheltered, meaning they're living outside in spaces unfit for human habitation. It could be in the Tujunga Wash, it could be in doorways, it could be around the 101 freeway. That's large when you look at it nationwide, but for the western region, when we look at all the western states, all of our large cities are struggling with how do we deal with such a large unsheltered population. 82% of our homeless residents are single adults, although family is a growing number that we're starting to see. 11% are veterans, and we hope to end veteran homelessness soon in the region. About 55% are between the working age, 25 to 54, although 10% are 62 and older. So we do unfortunately have people that are aging on the street. I know substance abuse is always a huge issue, particularly with Prop 47. But we actually 24% of people, so only a quarter, are identified with having a substance abuse issue. And about 21% have experienced domestic violence.
I'll just add a couple points. One thing just for folks, a lot of folks have heard the figure that we have 44,000 people who are homeless on any given night in the county of Los Angeles. I want to be clear, that's on any given night. In a given year, it's a much larger number because some folks get out of homelessness, some new folks fall into homelessness, unfortunately. So in any given year, we're trying to help house many, many more people than that, probably about 3 times that number. I know for our district, we've been looking really closely at what are the hot spots. I have a really fantastic intern who's done some geographic analysis for me lately. In terms of the San Fernando Valley, what we see is the greatest concentration, and he looked at it by neighborhood council areas, so the greatest concentration in the North Hollywood Northeast Neighborhood Council, and then Silmar behind that, and then Arleta, Sun Valley, and then Pacoima as the 5 neighborhoods in the valley with the greatest numbers, which I'm sure you guys live here, you know this firsthand. But that's one of the things we're taking a look at is where are those hot spots and how do we address that.
So those are the folks that we're targeting for assistance. So Molly, could you start and just talk a little bit about kind of what the approach has been for the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, and what's this Housing First thing that I keep hearing about, and Project 50, and kind of what are we looking at moving forward? Is it the same thing that we've been doing, or are there different models out there that we're looking at as a county? And then Alyssa, you'll talk about that as a city.
So, I mean, one big point I really want folks to understand is that street homelessness, as we know it today, is still a pretty recent phenomenon. It really emerged in the 1980s, and so we're, 30, 40 years into this epidemic and starting to understand it much better. In the early days, when street homelessness first emerged, the idea was sort of let's fix people so they can get back on their feet. Let's give them job training. Let's give them substance abuse training. How do we get people back on their feet? Which worked for some folks. But over time, we came to realize that really at the crux of homelessness is lack of having a home. And all the work to fix people was often for naught if we didn't address that fundamental issue of people who are homeless need a home. We also learned that people were much likely to get better if they had a home. It is pretty challenging when you're worried about where you're going to get your next meal. Are your belongings safe? Are you going to be safe from violence? Where are you going to sleep tonight? When you have these very sort of immediate needs to think about, people are less likely to deal with things like an underlying mental health issue or a substance abuse issue or the health care they may need because they have more immediate pressing needs to deal with. And so a model emerged called Housing First, which was the idea if we can get people stable in a home, they will be much more likely to address those underlying causes of their homelessness than when we ask them to do that either on the street or in a shelter, because even a shelter is a very, very chaotic environment. A very hard place to live. We have one of the best shelter providers in the entire country, sitting right next to me here. They operate a really amazing emergency shelter, and John will tell you the exact same thing. Even in the absolute best emergency shelter, very chaotic environment. So for a number of years, we've been doing a Housing First model. We do that in a couple of different ways. We do permanent supportive housing, which is a long-term apartment for folks with wraparound services for our folks who have really high challenges. And we also do a model called rapid rehousing, which is for folks who don't have many challenges, just trying to get them into an apartment in the community, pay their first month's rent, give them some rental assistance and some support, and then they take over the rental payments on that apartment pretty quickly. But what we've found is that we've got to get people stabilized in the community in a home of their own, or we really don't have any shot at all. So everything you hear coming out of the county and the city, you will hear at the very heart of those plans is trying to get people into homes as quickly as possible and provide the right level of support so that they can succeed back in the community as quickly as possible.
And I will echo, at the city level, as Molly spoke about, we have adopted the Housing First. So much of our funding for permanent housing is geared toward Housing First, asking, do you have low barriers to allow people into housing? Moving away from that traditional model that we had and really prioritizing those applicants that are able to have a strong case management, have strong social work components and connection to services, and are willing to allow people to move into housing and provide those services as needed. The one aspect I want to talk about that we're doing, all of us are doing, so right now the city and the county were very much aligned, and we're just both playing to our assets, so that's why so much of what we're doing sounds the same, because it is, which is really great. And one aspect is, how do we find the people? How do we make sure we're putting the right person in the right unit? So the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level identified a best practice called coordinated entry. And we have adopted that here locally called the coordinated entry system. And in each SPA, there's a lead organization. So for SPA 2, it's LA Family Housing. And it's a way really doing intense work at the ground level, bringing every provider together. It could be the church that's doing food cover to a sophisticated housing developer. It could be a private landlord who wants to get involved. LAPD participates, Department of Mental Health. They have roundtables where they talk about what are the needs of our homeless residents in this community, what resources do we need, who does what best, and let's stop working in silos, deduplicate services so that we have real comprehensive. And they actually have by name lists. So when we talk about addressing homelessness almost as a neighborhood-based solution, this coordinated entry process creates that table for that to happen, where we truly do know, well, at least those that are working directly, who is homeless within that community, what are their needs, and what is the best housing available for them.
Ron, your input on this?
The only thing that to add on this, so Elise was talking about the coordinated entry system. So this is a system that started in 2014, mid-2014, and so it's in operation now almost 2 years. And we have assessed to date a little over 2,100 people in San Fernando Valley, and have been able to house 528 of the persons considered chronically homeless, meaning the longest term, hardest to house homeless individuals. And of that, 100 of those individuals went directly into permanent housing from the street, meaning they did not have to go into a shelter and spend time in a shelter environment. Our staff worked with them right from the street to get them into permanent housing, and that's what Housing First is all about, is getting people into housing as quickly as possible and avoiding any steps that a person may be placed into to say you have to do this first. We're just putting them right in the housing.
I just want to say how this works on the ground level right here is I got an email today from one of the social service providers here, and they said, hey, we're working with, Sue Smith, and she is interested in shelter and services. She's qualified, but she said she has a warrant out for X, Y, and Z case. Is that something we can work with you on, that if we bring her to court and she takes care of the warrant, we can kind of fold in some social services and whatever and kind of handle the case that way. So that's how they're working with me and with LAPD also. So, but it's slow, it's case by case, it's a lot of effort on one person until it works, and I'm saying so, but it does work here in our community. Let me ask the kind of big elephant in the room question, which is we don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough places to put all of these people, even if they all wanted the assistance right now. How do we get that affordable housing, and how do we pay for it?
So folks may have heard or may not have heard, one of the big initiatives that Supervisor Kuehl worked on from the day she took office was around funding for affordable housing, because we are in an absolute housing crisis. I don't think there's a person in Los Angeles who doesn't know that. And we are seeing the effects on our sidewalks. This is, what you see out there is directly connected to our housing market, which has tightened unbelievably. And it's really incredible when you start looking at, what has changed in the last 20 years and how unaffordable LA has become during that time. And at the same time, the portion of renters in our city has increased, which means there's much more demand for rental housing, which we see nationally as an outcome of the Great Recession, unfortunately. A lot of people fell out of home ownership, which meant we had a lot more people in demand in our rental market, and we have a real imbalance now, and at the same time, wages are stagnant. So more demand for rental housing, rents go up, wages stay stagnant, and our sidewalks start looking the way they do. So we have a real supply issue. Supervisor Kuhl, this was a high priority in our office. We looked very closely at what had happened since the redevelopment agencies were dissolved in California, because that was a major source of affordable housing funding. A lot of the revenue that had previously gone to redevelopment agencies is now going to the county. So we decided a portion of that revenue should go to affordable housing, and we passed an affordable housing package last October, and the county is ramping up its commitment on affordable housing. In the next 5 years, we'll commit $300 million to build affordable housing, and then $100 million every year thereafter, because we have a real supply issue. That will not be enough. Even that amount of money committed to housing will not be enough. We're going to have to do everything in our ability, whether it's Kevin DeLeon's proposal to do a $2 billion bond for supportive housing, whether it's thinking about inclusionary zoning, which really freaks people out, but I don't know how else we're going to get the supply we need. Inclusionary zoning is when development of a certain size, like let's say somebody's building an apartment building of more than 50 apartments, a certain number have to be set aside as affordable. We're going to have to do everything in our power to create affordable housing, because this city is just going to look worse and worse if we don't. It's not tenable to keep going down the track we're going without changing our course. And if I could ask you to do one thing tonight, please support any affordable housing development in your community. It's really challenging for the developers who are trying to create affordable housing, but we desperately need it, and it has huge impacts. Those 500 people that John talked about, those are people who are no longer going to the emergency room for their health care. They're no longer ending up in our courts. They are no longer using drugs and alcohol on our streets. All of those things deeply impact not only our quality of life, but honestly our safety. People are much better members of the community when they have a roof over their head. But we need your support to be able to, build the units we need, which I know is very controversial, but extraordinarily important.
The way that we look at it, as we're developing this longer term actual building the homes, we're trying to do two things at the city level. One is just to increase the number of units overall, because we believe that if we increase the number of housing units, those that are market rate and also for workforce housing will kind of provide some sort of relief. We're also looking at, right now in the interim, providing as much rental assistance. But this really requires a partnership with private landlords to accept those rental assistance. And that's where, in a market where we have 2.7% vacancy, it's very challenging, because the landlord, John and I were just talking about, is going to say, here's someone on government subsidy, I have to fill out all this paperwork, my unit has to be inspected, and it has to meet a certain condition, versus here's someone else offering me double what I was offering, and I don't have to do any paperwork. But we have to really think of this as a community. Do we want to pay for people living on the street, or do we want to reduce that amount that we're paying and house people? And I think of something, when Molly was at Skid Row Housing Trust, there was two photos that she showed. One was someone who had been on the street, I forgot,
Over 30 years.
over 30 years, had an alcohol or substance abuse disorder, maybe focusing on alcohol, and you showed the picture of him like the first day when he was on the street. And then she would show this picture of him housed. And he's a totally different person. He could be in the room right now, and none of us would know his history. And so sometimes when we think about housing someone, we have to think about who they are at their best, not who they are when they first walk into John's door, or when John's outreach team worker sees someone in the street. And that's something to think about as we really are desperately in need of landlords to step forward and set the rent. And we do have even different models. So the city put in $10.1 million in rapidly housing. That's less conditioned than a Section 8 voucher. So we'll work with you. If someone says I have housing, or I have an idea of how to house someone, we'll work with you on the finance to help subsidize that unit.
John, you can totally comment on this, but could you also comment on kind of what the housing options that you have available to you right now in the valley are?
Sure. So we have in 25 years of my working with persons experiencing homelessness, we have never had the level of subsidized support available to us right now. So if we find someone who's on the street experiencing homelessness, we can check if they're a veteran. If they're a veteran, we can get them connected with a subsidized voucher to get them back in the housing. If it's someone who's not a veteran, but they have serious issues or problems, we're going to look at the permanent supportive housing road and see if we can get them into something of that, whether that's a site base, there's a building, or we're doing it on a scattered site basis, where we're providing services to a person in multiple units across the valley. If it's someone who's been homeless for a short time or who has the resources at some point to take on the rent payment themselves, then we'll do rapid rehousing, where we give the person just what they need to get into an apartment, and we pay a small portion of the rent subsidy working with their income, and then at some point we stop paying and they've taken over the full rent subsidy. And that's a new program that just started for individuals this year. So it's been nationwide for a long time, but the city of Los Angeles just started having that program this year. And the county, yes, the city and the county. So to illustrate the struggle though that we're having, we have 250 beds in our bridge housing in North Hollywood. 70% of the individuals right now in that bridge housing have a voucher or some other subsidized housing attached to them, and they can't find an apartment to move into. So these are individuals who we got off the street, put in bridge housing, they've been connected to a resource, and that resource will get them permanently housed, but we're not finding the housing for them to go into. And this is despite the work of housing staff that we have and other agencies have to find that housing. It's a really challenging housing market right now, and that's creating a lot of problem for everyone who's out there.
Can one of you, and maybe Joan, you'd be the best person to address mental health issues and people who are suffering from, pretty severe mental health issues who are out on the street, and does that pose a housing challenge or a social service challenge to the providers?
So, a million ways a person can become homeless. Not everyone on the street has mental illness, but mental illness is often found with persons who've been homeless for a very long time. Fortunately, right now, there are a lot of resources available to address that person who's on the street. The County of Los Angeles, the Department of Mental Health, has new outreach teams that are able to go out and provide services, bringing the clinic setting to the street. So a person who's on the street experiencing homelessness and mental illness can be served with a lot of the services that they would get going to a clinic, but right there on the streets. And this is a huge advancement in our work with people, because we're able to help them now get the medication and other services they need, where before they would have to go to a clinic, wait quite a bit of time to be served, and then it was unknown whether the follow-up would be there to actually get the services. It's also important that we recognize that having a mental illness itself should not keep you out of permanent housing. We should be able to put you in permanent housing despite the presence of an untreated mental illness. Because getting you into permanent housing is our goal, and then helping you to stabilize is the next step in the process. But it's very difficult to stabilize a person when they're living on the street. So we're better off getting the person in the permanent housing and then addressing the other issues that they're experiencing, whether that be mental health, substance abuse, or something of a combination of the two.
One of the things that I'm asked a lot, and by many of the people in this room, is most people want to help. They just don't know what that looks like. Should I be giving money to the guy standing in front of the coffee shop every morning? What about the guy in the freeway off ramp? I see that nice lady in the library all the time. Girl Scout troops now are packing little bags of toiletries. There are a lot of ways out there to help, and folks want to know what's actually helpful. What's a good idea, what's not a good idea, and how can people be helpful. So Melissa, you want to start out with some things that you might think, and then I'm going to go through the questions while we're answering?
Sure, this is a great question, because sometimes when people want to help and their intention to help often ends up only adding to the problem. I'm sure many of you have seen the news media or news articles about the tiny homes and the city's response to that. And one of the things when we look at that is that was a good idea that we wish we could partner, and still hopefully there's opportunity to partner that entrepreneur with a developer and put it on a site that has access to bathrooms and have showers, and to really use that model to build a community, not try to make what we have now more palatable, because what we have now is just not acceptable. We really need to move people into housing and to change our way around that. So I would say one of the top things to do is the families that John talked about, and this is a great for faith-based communities, sponsor a family to move in. Instead of, if you save those dollars that you give out every day, that could be a move-in, a grant to someone to help them buy furniture, beds, refrigerator, pay a security deposit, maybe they have a back utility deposit that they have to pay. That's flexible funding that helps him move that funding pretty quickly. I would also say that the hygiene kits are good, but work with an organization that has an outreach team that can use that as a tool of engagement, that can use something to build that relationship with something versus just kind of driving by and kind of giving it out haphazardly. I'm trying to think of some other ones, but it's really about leveraging with an existing organization.
Can I jump in? I just want to say, so for a number of years, I've done programs with people who've experienced homelessness, teaching them to tell their stories so we can understand the experience of homelessness better. And one of the things they always say is that the hardest thing about being homeless is feeling invisible. And so whenever they were asked that question, they would say, just smile and make eye contact. It's not necessarily helpful to give somebody $1, but it is helpful to acknowledge that they're a human being, and to say hello and say good luck to them or God bless you to them or whatever's comfortable for you to say, but please treat them like a human being. And our goal is to get them connected to services and housing. That's what's going to make a difference in their lives. $1 is not going to make a difference in their lives. They're still going to be homeless the next day. So any way that you can either, there's numbers you can call to have outreach workers come out if there's somebody you're really concerned about. But the goal is to try and link them to some help and not just leave them there and really get them on a path to recovery.
John, can you talk about what the Central Valley Homeless Coalition is and how folks could, find an organization they might want to work with?
Yeah, so the San Valley, and we've just added Santa Clarita Valley to our name. So we're actually now the San Fernando Santa Clarita Valley Homeless Coalition. And we meet monthly, and we have about 60 people who come to our meeting every month now. So it shows the attention that's being placed on this problem, and our meetings consist of homeless service providers, community members, and faith-based groups who want to see action done to end homelessness. So our next meeting of our group is actually this coming Wednesday, a week from today, at the new Zev Yaroslavsky Service Center on Van Nuys Boulevard. So our meeting will be at 2 p.m. It goes from 2 to 4:30. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome. We're going to be having some presentations there on a new housing development that an agency called PathWorks is doing in Reseda, and we'll be talking about what we're doing with our coordinated entry system. And you can bring up, we have community members all the time who come and bring up, there's a person on the corner here, what can I do or who can help? and a lot of problem solving will take place at the meeting, and we can make connections. So it's great. There are a lot of agencies that are providing terrific services right now in our area, getting people off the streets. When you leave today, there's a resource card here that I've placed on the table there, one that we hand out, our outreach team hands out. You're more than welcome to pick up copies of this. This lists numbers that a person can access services with, including our number as an agency for an individual or family experiencing homelessness. So feel free to pick up those. And that's something that with that smile you can give a person who's on the streets, or you can give us a call and say, I just saw a person, and give us their information, and we'll direct an outreach worker within the next week or so to go out and meet and make a connection.
There are a number of questions on the idea of affordable housing. What is affordable housing? Where is it going to go? And how much housing do you think could be created with the $300 million? So, Molly, if you wanted to tackle that.
Yeah, so we estimate that the $300 million will provide homes for 10,000 people over the next 5 years. It's a combination of housing that gets built and rapid rehousing resources like John talked about. For the housing that is built in the community, it's built in all different places. And I highly encourage you, LA Family Housing is a fantastic affordable housing developer. Get familiar with some of the developments they've done, like the Norman and Trudy Lewis apartments in Sunland, Tujunga, and Palo Verde in North Hollywood. Is Palo Verde North Hollywood?
Sun Valley.
Sun Valley. Thank you. But I think you'd be surprised, because I think a lot of people's expectation of affordable housing is you kind of think back to the projects of the 1960s. That is not what's being built today. There has been a moratorium on public housing since the 70s. It's being done by community-based groups now who really know how to integrate affordable housing into the community, and oftentimes it's the best-looking building on the block. So please take a look at some of the affordable housing that's been built recently. The Crest Apartments in Valley Glen are going to be opening pretty soon. There's some really fantastic examples very, very close to you. We do not, as a government entity, try and cite housing because we're no good at it. That's what we learned from the projects of the 1960s, is don't let the government do it. You want community-based groups like LA Family Housing, who really know the community, to be the ones to come to groups like yours and say, hey, there's a property for sale here. What do you think? Could we make this work? What would make it really work for the community? Does it have to be lower density than the other buildings around it? Does it have to include green space? There's a lot of things we can do to make affordable housing really fit into a community really well. So it is all done by private developers now who then apply to the county through a competitive process to get the funds to actually build the housing. Did I cover the main points?
Interesting question. What do we as a community do with people who don't want services? John, want to tackle?
Sure. So Peter Lynn, who's our executive director of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, which is the joint city-county agency that administers a lot of funding for the services we provide, had a great answer on this. It's hard to call someone service resistant, they don't want services, when the services that they need are not readily available. So if you're homeless on the street and we're offering you, let's get you off of the street, but we don't have a place to put you. We don't have a bridge housing bed. We don't have a permanent housing resource to put you in. And all we're doing is saying, let's have you wait in this line. Let's have you fill out this paperwork. We'll get back to you in 6 months. That's not a solution. That's a continuation of the problem. So it's really difficult for us to say, you're on the street and you're service resistant when the services are not available in the abundance that we need to really get the person off the street. So that's our challenge, is to make sure that we have the housing resources available so that when we see that person on the street and we say, do you want to get off the street? yes I do, I'm tired of living on the street, then we have a place to bring you today. Let's get you there and let's get you off of the street so you can be back in the permanent housing as quickly as possible. And we are not there yet, so it's really not fair to call anyone on the street service resistant or I just want to live here and not be connected to anything.
So here's, there's a whole bunch of questions, but so how are we gonna get to that place in the shortest period of time? Because that's a huge deal to basically say that every person who wants housing, we're gonna have a place to put them as quickly as possible in the next 5 years, 10 years. So concrete, what are the steps that we need to take as a community, in your opinion, to get there? Melissa, you wanna talk about that?
I think we have to look at what are we willing to do differently within each of our communities. And what I mean by that is if there's no affordable housing in the community, is there a form of affordable housing that this community could support? Maybe it's home for seniors, maybe it's home for veterans. You know, there's different populations that are in need, but once each community does its part, it can even be something, because we get many, many complaints, and understandably so, about the amount of just stuff that's out on the street. Well, we need an opportunity to provide people storage facilities. So if there are industrial areas that can be opened up for voluntary storage where people can take their things and store their family pictures and things like that, that will help reduce that. And it also sends a message that living on the street is not okay. It's not a way of life. It's a temporary moment until we move through this.
Okay, I think our officers may need to lead, our senior lead officers. Alice? Our senior lead officers. So, question for the moderator. People call both the police department and the city attorney's office and say, we have a problem. There's a person living on the street. I'm concerned about him. I'm concerned about walking by him. I don't know what he's going to do, or she going to do. Why doesn't the police do something? Why doesn't the city attorney's office do something? What is the answer?
In 30 seconds or less, and Trent and Jose can chime in as well. Right now, there used to be a law in the city of LA about living in your vehicle. That's no longer against the law. There used to be a law about camping on the sidewalk. Since we don't have enough shelters placed, anyone's allowed to camp out on the street or on the sidewalk between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. or 24/7 in inclement weather. There was a case called Levon, which you can read all about it, but it basically says the city can't dispose of someone's stuff even if there's a cleanup and the whole thing, if there's no other place for them to store it. So when you call the police and you say, do something about this guy and all his stuff, he's on the street, it's stinky and it's disgusting and it's blocking and all sorts of things, they can't really do anything about it. Because the courts have said, City of LA, you don't have any other options for people living on the street, and you can't just throw them in jail and throw their stuff away because they're homeless. So when you call your senior lead officers, or you call the bike unit or the Van Nuys Quality of Life car, they're gonna go out, they're gonna talk to the person, we're gonna call folks who work with John and say, hey, there's a guy out here, can you come talk to him? We're gonna offer services, we're gonna do all sorts of things. At some point, the person might be arrested for doing something else, drinking in public or something like that. But other than that, that's really, this isn't a problem that the law enforcement system can solve. And I'd really like John to kind of talk about that piece.
Sure. So first of all, you're very fortunate to have Van Nuys PD. They're very proactive right now on dealing with homelessness. So we should say thank you to them for that. They are an example of this. Our coalition held a housing summit last December. And Van Nuys PD was there at the housing summit and was at a table with the outreach teams who practice outreach across the San Fernando Valley. And the specific focus turned to Van Nuys. What Van Nuys PD has done is they have identified the 20 most targeted homeless individuals in the Van Nuys area, and these are people who they get the most calls about. And they put together their own hotspot list of the individuals, and they are working with our outreach teams, making the connections. And I believe in talking with our lead outreach person before I came here, that 4 of those 20 individuals have been connected with a Section 8 voucher and are being worked with to get into permanent housing. And that's because the officer knew who the individual was, made the connection with an outreach team, and that outreach team made the connection with the permanent housing. So that's the type of partnership that we need to work with LAPD across the San Fernando Valley and have more of these types of partnerships and model what Van Nuys is doing. 'Cause it
Okay,
really works.
my wife Sally often says to me, I see this person on the sidewalk. This person is, has issues. Give me a number that I can call. Well, what am I supposed to do? Give me a number. Can someone give Sally a number?
We'll give her a card.
Okay, so we say for the Sallys of the world, pick up a card on the table, and we'll put the number, is one number, right?
Yes, so if it's an individual that's listed on here, and you can dial
Okay.
that number.
So we'll put it in the next newsletter as well.
Okay.
I guess maybe one other question from the audience, and then we're going to encourage people to come up and ask our panel individual questions. Also, Jules has a lottery that we need to award some gift certificates. Okay, one more question, and then Jules, come on up.
I guess I would ask just a real short answer from each of you. What's the most frustrating thing about this issue to you? Molly?
I think right now, as we talked about, the most frustrating issue is the lack of landlords who are willing to take Section 8 or other rental assistance right now. It's very frustrating to have people who've said, I want help, I want to get off the street, for the government to provide the resources, and we still can't find an apartment for those folks to go into is very frustrating right now. But even with that, I'm still very hopeful. But that's, I think, our biggest challenge.
It would be what Molly said, but since she already said that, I would just add, we have to, while we're in this interim period, we really need to rethink about space within our communities where people can thrive. So that people can't move into housing quickly, what programs do we create for them while they're out on the street? How do we carve out space within recreation centers, libraries, gymnasiums, and faith-based organizations? What do we do with them? Tents come down at 6 o'clock in the morning, so they're not just idle to be in the neighborhood. Really, what do? Do we bring out the old bookmobiles? I don't know. We have to get creative, and we really am open to some ideas around rethinking how do we curate public space to engage people and again build on their strengths and allow them to forget that they're homeless for a while.
In brief, I would say rather than frustration, I'm looking at this as excitement because we've never had a time when the city and the county have been misaligned on this problem with the federal government and the resources that are being put into the system. We just need the housing to make this work, and I'm confident that we'll get there.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for listening and participating, and give us your good ideas. Thank you.
I want to thank John and his wife for putting this together in the panel. Also, Anita tells us that you can call 311 as well, and they will direct calls. So, Jules, do we have some giveaways?